Good evening. Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. I'll be tonight's host. With us, we have Hector Lopez and Daniel Vila, who are going to talk with us about Puerto Rico in a first show. We're going to do two shows tonight. The first one's going to be about Puerto Rican political options. They're going to explain to our audience where exactly Puerto Rico is, what not geographically, of course, but what the political system is in Puerto Rico. And the second show we're going to do is about in the environment and Vieques, which is where the United States tests its military armaments and munitions and effects that that's had on the environment in Puerto Rico. First of all, gentlemen, tell our audience a little bit about yourself. Who are you? Where are you from? What brought you to this place in time? And what moves you to do what you do?
Okay, I'll be first on this.
Okay.
First of all, I had been organizing an activity for Greenpeace against global warming, and I asked one of the directors of Greenpeace to send me addresses of other Greenpeace activists that were doing that. So but two guys came over and we got together, and then the conversation veered towards different issues besides global warming, and I told Sal Liccione.
Sal Liccione, a great friend of the show.
Right. So I told him I want to get in touch with the progressive Democrats, and he says, "Oh well, this is what you can do. You know, why don't you talk in this show?" So I said, okay, so give me the address or the phone number. So he gave me the phone number of David here, and then we got in touch and we decided for a date, and here I am.
And you, Daniel?
Well, like close to about 1 million Puerto Ricans back in the 1940s and 50s, my parents migrated from Puerto Rico to the United States looking for work. I'm from a rural town. I was born in Puerto Rico called Las Piedras, which today has a population, Las Piedras. It's on the east coast of Puerto Rico. It has a population of about 40,000 people. And my parents came here looking for work, and my mother worked as a seamstress all her life, and my father as a factory worker in Long Island City. Then I studied here in New York City, in City University of New York, and I attended Pentecostal church like so many other people, and I actually believed everything they talked about in Pentecostal church about social justice and against the war and so on and so forth. So when I entered Borough of Manhattan Community College back in 1968, I became active in the movement against the war and the emerging Puerto Rican struggle at that time for justice for Puerto Ricans here in New York City. And basically that's where most of my life I've dedicated, I think I've dedicated a large part of my energies to try to see if we could have a little bit of social justice in this world.
It sounds like justice and peace are more than just a slogan for you guys.
Right.
Oh, he just reminded me that I miss some things.
Oh, yes.
So anyway, I was born in Puerto Rico. I came here when I was 14 years of age, and then we went back to Puerto Rico. I was still a child. And then we came back, but we went to live in New York City. And we lived there till 1991. And then I wanted to go back to come back to Connecticut. But I wanted to come back to a place that wasn't far from my job in New York City with the MTA. So I decided to get a place in New Canaan. And I've been there since 1991. My daughters grew up there. They went to school there. And I had been a sympathizer for the independence of Puerto Rico since childhood, because my father survived the Ponce massacre that occurred March 21st, 1932. He survived the Ponce massacre with 3 uncles of mine, and that remained in my heart and mind forever. And the account what happened at the Ponce massacre under President Delano Roosevelt is what motivates me, is what drives me, is what gives me the passion to struggle for the independence of Puerto Rico. And then I realized that also the motherland is Puerto Rico, but also the planet is our motherland too. And that's why I participated with Greenpeace, which I endorse. I also endorse the Green Party as being two organizations that where I fit in as a activist and as a person that and as someone who can express his views and feelings without being overwhelmed by contradictions or what I would I would not be contradicted like I would be contradicted if it was in the Republican Party, for example, or maybe some Republican-like Democrats, Okay, so this is what brought me here, the Ponce Massacre, I would say.
Sounds
in
like
a certain way.
Sounds like a very life-changing event. Well, of course, many people who've come to America have seen horrible events in other parts of the world where they're originally from, and that's part of it. It stays with you, I'm sure. I mean, even though I'm third generation Irish, I know parts of the history of Ireland and some of the things that took place over there that our children and our grandchildren should not forget. What is Puerto Rico's relationship to the United States?
Well, that's a good question with which to begin, I think, because a lot of people believe that Puerto Rico is an independent country, totally separate from the United States, and others believe that it's totally integrated to the United States, and in reality, Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States. It's sort of like neither here or there politically in terms of the United States, but for Puerto Ricans, all Puerto Ricans today accept that Puerto Rico is a colony. It was invaded by American soldiers at the height of the so-called Spanish-American War.
Right.
And American troops went in there and took it over, literally as war booty from their point of view. For many years, the only people that recognized and accepted that Puerto Rico was a colony were people that support independence, like we do. But today, even statehooders openly say Puerto Rico is a colony. We want to become full-fledged Americans, say stateholders, and therefore we want Puerto Rico to become a state. And we, who believe in independence, recognize their argument. At least we recognize their logic, although we disagree that it will become stops being a colony if it were to become a state.
Now, when you say colony, do you mean colony in the classical sense, the same way that Britain controlled the original 13 colonies in Northeast America?
Absolutely, and possibly more. Because today, the United States controls Puerto Rico totally. In terms of military control, all military affairs are in the hands of the United States. Economically, Puerto Rico cannot, for example, if it wants to trade with Japan or with Russia or with whatever country, it has to have the permission of the United States authorities.
Which is not given.
Which is not given. But the other point I wanted to say is that...
by all laws of the United States without the benefits?
Well, that's the thing. All the laws of the United States take precedence over Puerto Rican law. Puerto Rico does have its own constitution, but the laws which take prevalence are American laws. Now, Puerto Rico does have the right to have what is called a resident commissioner, comisionado residente, who sits in the House of Representatives, but that person cannot vote. That person has to wait. In fact, it's very humiliating. In order to speak, the person has to be recognized by a member of the Congress, another representative, to acknowledge that person to stand up and speak. So Puerto Rico doesn't even have a vote in the U.S. Congress.
I watch the House of Representatives occasionally on C-SPAN, and I don't ever remember not only hearing a Puerto Rican representative speak, but I don't ever remember a camera being on, to my recollection, a member of the delegation of, delegation of one person from Puerto Rico. Do they ever, as that person, how often do they get to speak in the House of Representatives?
Probably very few times. The person right now, his name is Pierre Luisi. He's the resident commissioner. But his role is really an insignificant role. What determines what happens in Puerto Rico right now basically is American corporations. Basically just the way it happens in the United States today. The people who determine every facet of life in Puerto Rico right now are these big corporations which control everything. Shopping malls in Puerto Rico, for example, which are basically U.S. companies, have taken over the economic life of the country. The small businessman, small business person, the small firms which used to be spread out throughout the whole country, they have been, if you go to my town of Las Piedras, for example, some 40,000 people, you go into the center of the town and it's a ghost town. You go into the small town of Juncos, Gurabo, Caguas, all of these towns, the center of the towns have been basically depleted of all economic life. And life is now, basically economic life is in the shopping malls where you have American companies. I won't mention their names, but it's the same companies that, when you go to a shopping mall in Puerto Rico, you feel you're in the U.S. And in this sense, you feel like the United States of America. In that sense, it's an Americanizing sense. But actually, when you go in there, the culture, it's all Puerto Rican. The way people behave, the way people act and speak and so on, it's in Spanish and so on. It's a different cultural ambience.
You were...
Yeah. The businesses in Puerto Rico have English names, but when you first go there, you might think that everybody there is English speaking, but then anywhere you go, then you realize that Puerto Rico is not English speaking, it's a Spanish speaking country. It's a Latin American country that's under the United States military occupation, and we are not settlers from, like for example, from the 13 colonies who went to other territories, wiped out the Indians, set up towns and cities, and asked their country to accept them into statehood. We are not settlers from the United States. So therefore, statehood doesn't apply to us as far as I'm concerned, because we are an occupied nation, an occupied Latin American nation that should be independent. Our case is not a case of civil rights in Puerto Rico. Our case is one of national rights, the rights of Puerto Rico to trade with other countries, to have its own monetary system, to elect its own presidents, senators, and congresspeople, and to be able to decide anything about our lives and our culture. Right now, we are stifled. We are, in fact, starting during the invasion, we were forced to study in English from kindergarten to the university up until 1949. That was changed back to Spanish because it wasn't working. We were forced to salute the flag of the United States without knowing what we were saying, and our flag couldn't fly in Puerto Rico up until 1952, 2 years after the nationalist Puerto Ricans made an uprising that was repressed by the United States military. And so they gave that concession of letting our flag fly freely and to have a puppet governor.
You mentioned that Puerto Rico was invaded by the United States around 1917.
1898.
No,
1898.
1898.
Right.
Oh, during the Spanish-American War.
Exactly right.
But there was something that took place, you mentioned something around the time of the First World War.
Well, what happened is that after the U.S. invades Puerto Rico, which in fact they also took advantage of that period to invade Cuba and establish the base at Guantanamo, and they also invaded the Philippines also. In 1900, they passed the Foraker Act, and then later on in 1917, they passed the what is known as the Jones Act. Now, with the Jones Act, which was passed, I believe, was in March of 1917, it came just in time to recruit Puerto Ricans into the armed forces. The United States was entering World War I at that time. And of course, you cannot fight for the United States as Puerto Ricans unless you were a citizen. So they were nice enough to impose American citizenship on us, just enough time for 20,000 Puerto Rican soldiers went to and took part in World War I. Interestingly, one of the soldiers who went, his name was Albizu Campos. Albizu Campos fought for the United States during the First World War. But Albizu Campos returns to the United States, and he studies in Harvard University and gets 2 doctorates in chemical engineering, I believe it was, and in law. And Albizu Campos becomes the greatest leader of Puerto Rican independence, historically speaking. And he was incensed when he discovered so much racism and reality has opened up in terms of how much repression there was going on. All he really wanted was for Puerto Rico to have the same rights as the United States. And he would talk about, and we talk about also, we see George Washington as a freedom fighter. Mm-hmm. George Washington struggled, fought against the British, and basically that's all that Albizu Campos wanted, and that's all that present-day independence people, supporters, want for Puerto Rico. There is the same rights which the United States has. That is to be an independent, free country and to decide its own destiny.
And like United States, after the dust had settled from the war with the British, became very friendly with the British from that point forward. Well, a little later, after the War of 1812. Right. Mm-hmm. But the same situation could apply where Puerto Rico, once it gains that independence, could have a normalized relationship with the mainland United States.
Why not?
It seems.
Sure. And we think so. And in fact, if I'm a labor organizer, and I've traveled the country. I've gone many cities and seen the situation here in the United States, and been to Puerto Rico. I lived there many years also, and have traveled there. And the Puerto Rican working class and the working class of the United States of North America are very, very integrated. I mentioned earlier how my parents came from Puerto Rico and they worked in factories most of their life that they were here in the United States. And American factories and retail shops, shopping, department stores in Puerto Rico, for example, they bring the American culture to Puerto Rico. And because of many other reasons, the economies and the behavior of the Puerto Rican working class and the U.S. working class is very similar. And our destinies are probably going to be tied in the future also.
Is that right? Just a table falling apart.
That was the midget under the table.
That was the midget, yeah.
Okay, can I add something about Don Pedro Albizu Campos? Don Pedro Albizu Campos was the leader of the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party. He was studying at Harvard, and he became a friend of Eamon de Valera, the first president of Ireland, and he supported the independence of Ireland and the independence of India. Dr. Pedro Albizu Campos had a doctorate, was getting a doctorate in Harvard, a doctorate in law, and as I understand from what I have read, he and Eamon de Valera wrote the Irish Constitution. I have to do some more research about this, but I wouldn't be surprised if what I read is true.
That'd be a great point of reference for the audience to do a little research and learn about, because many Americans are of Irish descent, and to learn of a wonderful connectivity between their Irish forebears and Puerto Rican forebears, that camaraderie and that understanding of one another and mutual respect and mutual goals would be a fabulous point of reference for people to study.
These are the things that we just are not taught. Unfortunately, we should go to school, public school, or college, or whatever, education, and learn these things. Unfortunately, we have to learn them on our own, word of mouth of other brothers and sisters. But there was great solidarity, and incredible solidarity between the struggle for Puerto Rican independence and also the struggle for Irish self-determination in the 1930s and 1940s. The 60s, we forget those things, but it's there. It's in history.
Memory is short.
But the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party was influenced by the Irish nationalists. So there are many things that are common between the Puerto Rican independence movement and the Irish independence movement. So that's one thing to think about and to openly say, so that more bonds of solidarity occur between Ireland and Puerto Rico, and between the Irish people here in the United States and the Puerto Rican people.
Now you had mentioned about business in Puerto Rico, the business situation, and how downtowns with the traditional small businesses, the family businesses, are not as predominant anymore as they once were, and how large corporations, well, you could say United States corporations, but they're really, in fact, multinational corporations.
Multinational corporations, yes.
Have taken over. Now, I see a lot of that. You know, we're local here in Danbury, and Danbury has a downtown that once thrived based on immigrants, because Danbury's had waves and waves of immigrants from everywhere on the globe. And we had a very vibrant downtown again a few years ago. We had the Ecuadorians and the Brazilians and a lot of other wonderful immigrant groups, and small businesses were springing up, and the downtown was vibrant. And now the downtown is contracted again because of some issues that we can ascribe to the mayor of Danbury, Mark Boughton. But are there small businesses in Puerto Rico? Or is that completely going the way?
As I mentioned a little while ago, I've worked for the last several years as a labor organizer, and I've had the opportunity as such to travel and see cities, throughout the United States. And it's interesting that the same phenomenon that you see in Puerto Rico, you see happening here in the United States, or vice versa. And that is that basically these big multinational corporations are destroying the mom and pop shops. I'm not going to mention any names, but you can't have a local coffee shop nowadays because the big coffee chains, one or two of them, are eliminating. You can't have a small store selling videos. In fact, in Puerto Rico for several years, I had a store renting videos. I was put out of business because the big monster chain, which I won't mention, ruined my business and ruined the business of hundreds of Puerto Rican businessmen in Puerto Rico. And it's happening here in Allentown, in New York City, all over the place, in Danbury. And I think basically what we're confronting is a situation where big capital is just becoming humongous. Not only in the United States, not only in Puerto Rico and Latin America, but throughout the world. It's expanding, and it's a monster, in my opinion, which must be stopped. And only working people organizing and supporting peace and fighting and struggling for justice can stop this huge undemocratic monster, because when corporations become so powerful that they decide who is going to be the governor or the president or the mayor and who's going to be the police commissioner, and they decide every single law, it's just undemocratic. And what we need is for working people to have a little bit of power, at least a little bit of power like we did, like my parents and grandparents did back in the 1930s and so on and so forth. If I could talk about a little bit about the present situation in Puerto Rico, now that we talk about this economic crisis. Presently in Puerto Rico, we have a governor called Luis Fortuño, who has implemented these policies of privatization, of totally eliminating, destroying the public sector, and imposing what we call neoliberal policies.
Also called neocon.
Neocon policies, exactly. But neoliberalism should not be confused with liberalism.
Correct.
It's a very right-wing, anti-labor, anti-community, anti-mom and pop shop type of ideology. And what the present governor has done, he's fired close to 30,000 workers, or announced the firing of some 30,000 workers by this month of January. And this has resulted in a great backlash of working people. All the unions in Puerto Rico, whether it be independent Puerto Rican-based unions or American AFL-CIO or the SEIU Change to Win unions, for example, they've all united one huge block basically demanding that this not be done, that these workers be reinstated. And they're preparing in the months of January and February for a massive general strike. Now, last year there were 3 huge labor stoppages in Puerto Rico where economic life was brought to a standstill. There was one huge demonstration in which there were, on October 15th of last year, over 200,000 people on one huge demonstration, but the whole country was paralyzed, not only the public sector, but the private sector also. And this confrontation, unfortunately, continues to today. And working people are organizing in Puerto Rico for a indefinite labor strike, total social strike against the policies of this governor in Puerto Rico, Luis Fortuño, who in addition happens to be very pro-statehood.
Where do Americans go? Where do people in America go to find out? Because we know the news has become very corrupt and very homogenized, and it loves to talk about very important things that happen in our world, like little boys flying across hundreds of miles, or not flying across hundreds of miles of airspace in a balloon. Where do we go to find real information about what's happening in Puerto Rico? Is there a source?
That is a problem, because unless you are connected in the United States with some of the electronic, through the internet, emails and so on, it is very difficult for you. You cannot get it, unfortunately, in the private sector television, TV or radio or newspapers either. The most you could do is put Puerto Rico, and let's say if there's a labor issue going on, put Puerto Rico general strike or Puerto Rico labor struggle or whatever, and you'll be able to get information because there are several organizations and groups in the United States which have websites and which have regular email lists which send out information, but it is very, very difficult. People have to be connected to other organizations which have that type of info.
What do Americans that have been second, third generation Americans of Puerto Rican descent in the United States, how do they connect with folks in the home country? And how can they bond together and work together for a common good?
Oh, okay. First of all, there is always a going and coming back from Puerto Rico to the U.S. And there's also TV, if you buy the service that shows you about life in Puerto Rico.
Would that be on Telemundo?
Well, Telemundo used to be a Puerto Rican-owned television, and it was bought by powerful.
Okay, we're going to have to cut it off there. We've got a lot more to talk about in a follow-up show, but we're going to come back in a few minutes, and we're going to do a show about the environment in Puerto Rico and military armament testing. This has been Progressive Soup. I'm David Stevenson, and we have Hector Lopez and Daniel Vila with us tonight, and we'll be back in a few minutes with a second show. Thank you very much. Good evening. We got it a little bit into enough.
It's complicated. It's very complicated. Yeah.